actually, how will I say, implementing the program on the ground. We all knew the language and the ideas. They were like cliches. Everybody knew about self-help, planning from below, community participation, and so on. We all knew all those shlokas. But the government was in this awkward position where they were not ready to commit to what John is saying, that they're willing to let you work on this process and over time see the results. They had these imperatives that required goals to be met. So even though it's supposed to be planning from below, India simultaneously, influenced by the Soviet Union actually, had 5-year plans. And so here we were supposed to be working on with villagers and helping them define what their problems were and finding ways to assist them and so on. At the same time, a program would come down from the central government, like, let's see, I remember one particular one that I always will never forget. They were trying to introduce the Japanese method of paddy cultivation. Now, paddy is rice, in this case. And what that was a combination of good agricultural practices. You selected the seed, you treated the seed, you planted it, and then you took the young shoots and transplanted them in rows so that it would be easy to cultivate between those rows. And the government offered incentives to farmers. If you adopt the Japanese method of rice cultivation, you will get free fertilizer, something like that. So villagers, not being too dumb, realized that here's a great chance of getting some free fertilizer. So I learned this after a long time. There would be whole villages where the village workers would proudly say, "Look at this. These people have adopted this method. Look at their fields. All the rice is in rows." Well, that was about it. What the people did actually is they didn't do all those other measures, but they realized that the visible evidence was to plant things in rows. So it didn't really increase their production, but they got them some free fertilizer. But, there was that conflict between goals from above and goals that people were developing that was a great problem. And I wrestled with it for many years, but that's a long story. It's, for a government to try to initiate a program which is based on people's initiative from below, it's a really difficult thing to do. It would be difficult, in any government, but if you're trying to plan, So that troubled me for a long time. And the other thing that troubled me was that they were trying to change this from a law and order revenue collecting government to a social welfare government. But they were taking some existing civil servants, maybe somebody who'd been a clerk somewhere, and making them a village level worker. They gave some training to the person. I don't know to go into all the complications of what a village level worker is, but in effect, that's the first line worker at the village who's a link between the villager and the different subject matter departments, you might say, agriculture, health, education, and so on. And there were some backup people above them from these disciplines. But if you sent somebody there who was an old government servant who'd always done work a certain way, it's not easy for them to go to a village and listen to people and encourage discussion among people. Obviously they go in there and they have ideas, you can improve this village. So that was the problem. I remember I set that one for myself. How do you transform the average government worker, office worker, into a fairly effective community development worker at the grassroots level. It's a very pragmatic problem. I worked on it for years because I could see that as a crucial area, because we had this was a national program. And as I said, we were going to reach 500,000 villages with this program. So twice a year, new projects would be begun all over the country. One of the times was Gandhi's birthday, October 2nd, I remember. And they would set up these projects, which had village workers and agricultural people and social education people and health people and so on, in what are called community development blocks. Well, they would open up these blocks, whether they had all that staff or not, because that was the target. You had to open it. To get the money to the state government, you had to open blocks. So you'd have these sort of incomplete blocks. I mean, that, where they didn't have a full staff, or where the village workers weren't properly trained, or what have you. But it was growing all the time, the whole program. So there were some very hard practical problems that I could see. Of course, I was in a way an outsider too. I mean, I wasn't caught up completely in the government system. So it was very hard to get changes. After I'd worked in West Bengal for almost 2 terms, 3 or 4 years, I was transferred for health reasons. And so I wrote this final report in which I was reflecting on my experience. I wish I could find it now. But the thing is, I raised all these kinds of questions that I was raising now. And about how, we thought we were achieving these goals, but actually very often there was a slippage and so on. And I reported to our whole staff, whom I knew very well. They all listened very politely, and they said, "Very good, Bill, very good." And then I went on my way to Iran. And as far as I could say, they didn't do anything differently, except that they liked my report. They published it, and we published it in that Community Development Review. So I was away for 2 years. On my way back home from Iran, I passed through India. So I stopped to see my old colleagues. They were delighted to see me, and they said, "You must come and speak to us." We had a lot of meetings in that office. And I said, "Well, I've been away. I don't know what's happening now," and so on. And I don't have time to visit. I think I visited a couple of places, but they insisted. So I spoke to them, and I told them exactly the same things I'd said in my original report. Because from what I could see, there hadn't been much change. You know what they said? "This is terrific. I mean, these are great ideas." Maybe it was after that they published it, but they said, "These are really good ideas." They thanked me. They thought it was terrific, and they published it. What's that about? Or as we say, what's up with that, It's amazing. A prophet is without honor in his own land.
One function, Bill, that I'd ask you about is the function of being a cross-cultural switchboard operator, but also because of your status as an insider, outsider, and because you had direct access to Mr. Day himself, the commissioner, you were able to communicate vertically through that whole hierarchical job.
Yeah, well, I think we could. I think that was one of the most important functions of outside advisors.
Yeah.
Because that's a really important function. You could communicate all the way from the village worker right up to the highest level. And because you could know what was happening, and you didn't have anything to lose by really reporting it.
And even, you
That's a
know,
very important function.
many times, even though I wasn't very effective in doing that vertical communication, the fact that the Gram Civicas and Gram Civocs, the village workers, knew that I had visited the king, or I would go and have breakfast with the first minister of the
Yeah.
they assumed that anything they complained to me about, I would
Go right up to the top.
Right.
So they told you a lot of
Oh,
stuff.
they did, sure. And some of it we were able to do something.
We actually
We were
became
able-
experts that way.
Yep.
I mean, we actually learned more than a lot of our colleagues even. It was very interesting.
Yeah, that was another thing, and Jenny highlighted this for me when she said that so many of her contemporaries who knew of me and knew of my background assumed that I must be working for an intelligence agency.
Well, yeah, I assume that too.
Yes, because I did, you know, I freewheeled in a way that now I look back on. It wasn't from any, I don't think it was from any sense of arrogance, but it was because they all wanted to have the freedom to go on field trips. Even the prime minister, when we had a helicopter, we offered a chance to, you know, let's go out and dedicate a bridge over here. Oh, I've never been there. You know, and you take Dr. Tulsi Giri with you or Bishwabanda Tapa and go off for a couple of days. And even if they had to sleep on the ground, they were quite pleased. They'd been to these places.
Yeah, and John really, I mean, he was way ahead of me in this way.
Well, it was
In working in Nepal because he really did have access to the highest levels of